They say you're quiet, that you're hard to read, that you should speak up more. But what they never understand is that you've already said everything, just not out loud. You've spoken with your silences, with your distance, with your eyes when you look away instead of into them. And still, they label you shy, awkward, reserved, cold. But you're not any of those things. You're just tired of being misunderstood. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." That is the quiet war inside every introvert. You're not afraid of people. You're exhausted by them, by their noise, their speed, their constant need to fill the silence you've learned to respect. Because you've realized something. Silence doesn't mean emptiness. It means space. And space is where the real thoughts grow. But try explaining that to a world that sees silence as a weakness. Try telling them that being quiet doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you're waiting until it matters. Because introverts don't speak to be heard. They speak to be understood. And that's why so many of them stay silent. Here's what no one tells you. Most introverts weren't born quiet. They were made that way, conditioned by a world that punished their depth. As children, maybe they were told, "Why are you so serious? You need to make more friends. Don't sit alone. It looks weird. You'll never succeed if you don't network." And so, they learned that who they were wasn't enough. They tried to become louder, more agreeable, more outgoing. But each time they stepped out of their own rhythm, they felt it. The disconnection, the dissonance, the soul pulling back. Until finally, they stopped trying, not out of fear, but out of truth. Jung believed that the introvert is someone who processes life internally. They don't react to the world first. They reflect. They don't perform. They preserve. Their energy doesn't rise from crowds. It sinks into meaning. So when you walk into a room and feel drained after 10 minutes, it's not because you're antisocial. It's because your nervous system is too aware of everything. The conversations, the posturing, the emotions nobody's naming. And that awareness becomes a weight. Not everyone can carry it, but you do. Every day. That's what makes you strong. Not loud strong, not alpha strong, rooted strong. But the world doesn't reward that kind of strength. It rewards visibility, volume, presence. So you become invisible, even when you're in the room. And that invisibility doesn't just hurt. It makes you question whether you even belong. But let me tell you something no one ever told you. You do. Not despite your quiet. Because of it. The world is noisy. But you hold the silence that keeps it from collapsing. You notice things people skip. You feel things people avoid. You process pain instead of projecting it. And still, you're told to be more social, as if shrinking your soul into small talk is the measure of success. But what if being social isn't the highest form of connection? What if depth is? What if the person who listens more than they speak has more impact than the one who never shuts up? What if your stillness is the exact medicine someone else needs, but hasn't found yet? Carl Jung believed that every person must go inward to become whole, that without introspection, we stay fragmented. And introverts, they live there, in the inward space, in the silence where truth finally echoes back. So don't let them convince you that you're broken, that your softness is awkward, that your quiet is failure. Your quiet is alchemy. You turn noise into meaning. You turn loneliness into wisdom. You turn discomfort into observation. They can't see it. But you're doing more in one thought than some do in 1,000 words. So stay quiet, if that's where you find peace. Stay strange, if that's where you feel honest. Stay you. Because you've already spent too long trying to be someone louder, emptier, safer. And that person never felt like home. You ever walk out of a room full of people and feel like your soul just collapsed? Not because anyone was rude, not because anything went wrong, but because every second you were performing, smiling just enough, nodding at the right times, faking ease when your chest felt tight. That is not social anxiety. That is social exhaustion. Carl Jung believed that introverts aren't people who hate others. They're people whose inner world is louder than the outer one. So, when they're forced into long conversations, fake laughter, constant stimulation, they don't just feel tired. They feel erased. Let me tell you a story. There was a girl named Vina. She was kind, observant, quiet. Her friends said she was too sensitive. Her family said she was too serious. So she worked hard to become what they wanted. She joined every group, every outing, every plan. She smiled even when she didn't feel like it. She gave and gave and gave, just to be included. Until one day, after a weekend of back-to-back social events, Vina sat alone in her room and started crying for no reason. Her body wasn't sick. Her life wasn't falling apart. But her soul was drained. She felt like she couldn't hear herself anymore. That's when she realized something. Her energy was leaking into places she didn't belong. That cry wasn't sadness. It was truth, escaping through the only opening left. You might have had that moment too, where your calendar is full, but your heart feels empty. Where your voice sounds alive, but your spirit feels numb. Where everyone wants your attention, but no one sees you. And you don't even have the words to explain it. Because how do you explain to someone that a 2-minute conversation can feel like carrying a mountain when your inner world is already so full? That's the reality of being an introvert. You are constantly translating the world through your senses, noticing expressions, energy shifts, unsaid meanings. And all of that data gets processed internally. So when others feel energized by noise, you feel invaded by it. That's not weakness. That's sensitivity. And sensitivity is not fragility. It's depth. So how do introverts recharge? They don't just rest. They return. Return to solitude. Return to stillness. Return to the self they had to pause just to survive out there. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Introverts awaken in solitude. That's where their energy comes back, not from retreating, but from realigning. Here's what recharging looks like for an introvert. Sitting in a silent room with no one needing anything. Reading without interruption. Taking a long walk where they can finally breathe. Listening to music that doesn't ask for a response. Journaling thoughts that were never meant to be shared. Simply being with themselves. But what society teaches them is that this is selfish, that wanting to be alone means something is wrong. So they push through, show up, say yes, until the burnout becomes unbearable. Let me tell you something with full truth. You don't have to earn your rest. You don't have to explain why being around people drains you. You don't have to apologize for needing space. Space is how you hear yourself again. And you've spent enough time being everyone else's emotional support system. It's time to be your own. You might wonder why others don't feel this, why they can talk all day, hang out for hours, jump from event to event. It's not because you're broken. It's because they're wired differently. Extroverts gain energy from interaction. Introverts spend energy during interaction. One is not better, but pretending to be the other will slowly kill you. You can show up without shrinking. You can say no without guilt. You can leave early, unplug, recharge, and not feel bad for it. Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs people like you, who speak only when it's real, who listen with full presence, who show up whole, not forced. You're not shy. You're selective. You're not antisocial. You're energetically honest. And one day, someone will sit next to you in silence and feel more connection than 1,000 conversations ever offered. Until then, be your own sanctuary. Because the most powerful people are the ones who've made peace with their own quiet connection. But crowds drain you. You want someone to ask you how you really are. But small talk makes your soul ache. You dream of conversations that last all night, but avoid phone calls that last 5 minutes. And the world calls that contradiction. But Carl Jung would call it depth over diffusion, because introverts don't avoid people. They avoid performing. And most of what we call socializing today is performance. It's scripted laughter, filtered expression, attention-seeking noise that drowns out anything real. So you pull away, not because you're shy, but because you're starving for realness. Here's something introverts feel deeply but rarely say. I don't want more friends. I want a real one. One person who sees through the surface. One who doesn't flinch at silence. One who doesn't mistake your stillness for lack of depth. You can sit with them for hours and say very little and still feel like you shared something. Jung would call this individuation through relationship, a connection that doesn't demand your energy, but meets you in your center. But most people don't offer that. Most people demand access before they offer understanding. And that's why introverts step back. Not from love, from transactional company. Because we've all been there. You open up, just a little. You say something real, and the other person doesn't notice, or changes the subject, or turns it into a joke. And in that moment, you realize they're not with you. They're just near you. That moment creates distance, a quiet withdrawal, a gentle wall being built, one unmet word at a time. Let me tell you a story. There was a guy named Rehan. Smart, gentle, introverted. In group settings, he was silent. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because no one was saying anything real. People talked about gossip, money, problems, trends. He wanted to talk about dreams, purpose, why people do what they do, what pain teaches, what love means beyond desire. So he sat quietly. They called him boring. But one night, at a random cafe, he met someone who asked, "What's something you've never said out loud, but think about often?" And in that one question, he came alive. Because it wasn't people he hated. It was surface-level connection. And for introverts like Rehan, a single deep conversation can feed them more than 100 social events. Carl Jung believed that the psyche doesn't grow through stimulation, but through integration. And integration doesn't happen in chaos. It happens in stillness, in intimacy, in truth. That's why introverts look quiet at parties, but say everything at 2 a.m. with one person in a dim room where masks are gone. They don't just want company. They want depth. And if they can't have it, they'd rather be alone. Because alone, they're not drained. But around surface-level people, their energy leaks. Their soul retreats. Their mind floats away into safer places. So what do introverts truly need? Fewer people. More depth. They want eye contact that feels like safety. Pauses that don't feel awkward. Questions that don't feel rehearsed. Energy that doesn't scream, "Prove yourself." They want to talk about grief, not gossip. Desire, not drama. Childhood, not headlines. The things no one asks, but everyone feels. And when that conversation happens, you'll see the introvert transform. Not louder, but brighter, more animated, more awake. Because finally, they've been given permission to stop pretending. But this world isn't built for that. This world teaches you to network, not connect, to impress, not relate, to be visible, not vulnerable. So, introverts retreat, not as an escape, but as protection, until someone shows them, hey, you don't have to be someone else here. That's when they return. And that's when their real gift appears. Their depth, their empathy, their ability to hold space for emotion without trying to fix it or escape it. Because introverts don't just talk. They hold meaning. So if you're one of them, if you crave deep conversations but avoid people, know this: you're not broken. You're just waiting for someone who wants to meet your soul, not your surface. And until they arrive, your solitude is not a prison. It's protection. You're not shy. You're sacred. And not everyone should get to access you. You're quiet, so you speak louder. They say you're cold, so you force a smile. They say you're too serious, so you laugh at things that don't even touch you. And just like that, you become someone else. Not because you want to, but because you feel like you have to. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive the expectations of society. But what happens when the mask becomes your face? When you wear it so long, you forget who you were underneath. That's the hidden pain of the introvert. They're not quiet because they lack identity. They're quiet because their identity has been buried under years of adaptation. Every day, you shapeshift. You mirror people's energy. You soften your edges. You stay agreeable. You edit your words to sound more normal. Not because you're fake, but because you know what it's like to be punished for being real. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But for many introverts, that privilege feels like a danger, because the moment they show up as themselves, they're misunderstood, misread, misjudged. So they hide, not in fear, but in fatigue. Because explaining your depth to people who only value volume isn't a conversation. It's a drain. Let me tell you a story. A boy named Aryan, sensitive, thoughtful, reflective. He loved reading, not because books were better than people, but because books didn't interrupt him, didn't shame him for feeling too much, didn't call him boring for not liking chaos. But every classroom he entered rewarded the loudest voice. Every social circle rewarded the most outgoing personality. So slowly, Aryan began to perform. He became louder, more agreeable, more fun. He got invited to more things, praised for finally opening up. But every night, he returned home feeling emptier, because none of it was him. It was a role, a survival tactic, a mask worn for applause. Until one day, he couldn't do it anymore. He ghosted the group chats, canceled everything, and for the first time in years, just sat with his own breath. That moment wasn't loneliness. It was coming home. This is what many introverts go through silently. They go from authentic, misunderstood, misunderstood, masked, masked, exhausted, exhausted, disconnected, disconnected, alone. And when they finally retreat, people say, "You've changed. You're isolating. You're too sensitive." But what they don't see is how long you tried to stay present while losing pieces of yourself just to be accepted. Carl Jung believed that when we suppress our true self to maintain the persona, we exile the shadow, the parts of us we've rejected or hidden. For introverts, the shadow is often made of rage that they're never heard, longing to be seen for who they are, shame for not fitting in, pain from being mocked for their calmness. And the longer that shadow stays buried, the more numb they become, not just to others, but to themselves. They forget what their own voice sounds like when no one else is in the room. But here's the quiet truth. You don't need to become more like them. They need to become more like you. More still, more thoughtful, more honest. You're not the one wearing the mask. They are. You're just the one brave enough to sit in silence without needing validation. And that silence isn't emptiness. It's truth. Because when you take the mask off, you remember. Your seriousness is depth. Your quietness is presence. Your stillness is power. Your boundaries are sacred. You don't need to perform to be worthy. You don't need to entertain to be loved. You just need to return to your core, that untouched place inside you that never needed to prove anything to anyone. So if you've worn too many masks for too long, let this be your permission to take them off. You're not broken. You were just acting. And now, you're done pretending. You're not shy. You're sacred. And the people meant for you will never require you to become someone louder, emptier, or safer. They will meet you in your stillness and call it home. But before we end this quiet journey, ask yourself one question. What part of myself did I hide just to be accepted? Comment that truth below, anonymously if you want. Let this be your space, your silence, your return. And if this video felt like home, like someone finally understood what you've been holding in, tap that like button, subscribe for more psychological truth, and consider sending a super thanks to support our voice. Now, take a breath. The voice will fade. But the healing doesn't end here. For the next hour, let the music carry what words couldn't. Let it hold the parts of you that were never loud, but always real. We'll see you in the stillness.